A young woman 8 months pregnant walks into a bustling city market and is never seen again. Her name was Isabella Rossi, a name that would soon be etched into the minds of a community gripped by fear. For weeks, her husband Marco and her family plastered her smiling face on every lamppost, their hope a flickering candle in a gathering storm. The city held its breath, praying for a miracle. But the knock on the door that finally came wasn't with good news. It was the police, their faces grim, holding a single chilling piece of evidence: Isabella's wedding dress stained with her blood. The mystery of her disappearance was just beginning, and the secrets it would uncover would tear a family apart, proving that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones we invite into our own homes. The late afternoon sun of October 12, 2024, cast long amber shadows across the cobblestone streets of Florence, Italy. For Isabella Rossi, it was a day like any other, a day filled with the gentle kicks of her unborn son and the comforting weight of her husband Marco's hand in hers. At 28, Isabella was radiant, her dark hair a cascade of waves around a face that seemed to perpetually hold a soft, serene smile. 8 months into her first pregnancy, she carried the clumsy grace of impending motherhood, a joyful anticipation that seemed to color the very air around her. Marco, a man whose love for Isabella was as tangible as the ancient stones of their city, watched her from the doorway of their small apartment. He was a restorer of antique books, a man of quiet patience and deep passions, the foremost of which was his wife. "Be careful, my love," he called out, his voice a low melodic hum. "The market is a madhouse today." Isabella turned her hand resting on the swell of her belly. "I'll be fine, Marco. I just need some fresh basil for the pesto tonight, and maybe one of those little cannolis from Signora Moretti. The baby is demanding it." She winked a playful glint in her warm brown eyes. He chuckled, a sound that always made her heart flutter. "The baby has expensive taste." He walked to her, his large hands gently cupping her face. He kissed her, then a long, lingering kiss that tasted of coffee and a love that felt as old and enduring as the city itself. "Don't be long." "I won't," she promised, her voice muffled against his lips. With a final radiant smile, Isabella turned and walked down the narrow street, her light blue maternity dress a splash of color against the ochre and sienna of the buildings. Marco watched until she disappeared around the corner, a familiar, comfortable ache of love in his chest. He then returned to his workshop, the scent of old paper and binding glue a comforting cloak. He had a rare first edition of the Divine Comedy to restore a task that would usually consume him entirely. But that day, an unsettling disquiet nagged at the edge of his consciousness, a faint discordant note in the symphony of his contentment. He dismissed it as the anxieties of an expectant father. The hours bled into one another. The golden light of the afternoon faded into the bruised purple of twilight. The aroma of Marco's simmering tomato sauce filled their small apartment, but there was still no sign of Isabella. He checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages. A prickle of unease traced its way down his spine. She was never late, not without calling. He dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again, the same disembodied voice. He called her mother Elena, a woman whose fiery spirit was matched only by her fierce love for her daughter. "Elena, is Isabella with you?" Marco's voice was tighter than he intended. "No, Marco. Why is everything all right?" A mother's intuition, sharp and immediate. "She went to the San Lorenzo market hours ago and hasn't returned. She's not answering her phone." A tense silence hung between them, thick with unspoken fears. "I'll be right there," Elena said, her voice strained. Marco then called Isabella's father, a stoic man named Lorenzo, and her younger sister Sofia. Within the hour, their small apartment was filled with the frantic energy of a family on the precipice of panic. Lorenzo, his face a mask of grim control, immediately started calling the local hospitals. Sophia, her eyes wide with the fear that mirrored Marco's, began a frantic social media campaign, posting Isabella's picture with desperate pleas for information. The night deepened a suffocating blanket of darkness. Marco, accompanied by Lorenzo, went to the police. The officer on duty, a weary man with tired eyes, listened patiently, his pen scratching across the report form. "It's only been a few hours, signore," he said, his tone meant to be reassuring but managing only to be dismissive. "She probably just met a friend. Her phone died. These things happen." "Not with Isabella," Marco insisted, his voice raw. "She's 8 months pregnant. She would never just disappear." The officer sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "We'll file the report. If she doesn't turn up by morning, we'll start a formal investigation." The walk back to the apartment was a blur of streetlights and shadows. Marco's mind raced, replaying every moment of his last conversation with Isabella. Her smile, her wink, her promise. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle in his chest. The world he had so carefully built, a world centered around Isabella and their unborn child, was tilting on its axis. The days that followed were a living nightmare. The police, prodded by the family's relentless pressure, launched a full-scale investigation. They canvassed the San Lorenzo market, but no one remembered seeing a pregnant woman in a blue dress. It was as if she had dissolved into the bustling crowd, a ghost in the making. The media picked up the story, and Isabella's smiling face was suddenly everywhere. On television screens and newspapers, on the ever-present posters that Marco and a growing army of volunteers plastered on every available surface. "Have you seen Isabella Rossi?" The posters screamed a silent testament to a family's desperate hope. Weeks crawled by, each day a fresh wave of despair. Marco stopped working. He barely ate, barely slept. His waking hours were a torturous cycle of waiting for the phone to ring, for a knock on the door, for any news, any sign that his Isabella was alive. He would sit in their silent apartment, surrounded by the scent of her perfume that still lingered in the air, and talk to his unborn son, promising him that his mother would be home soon. The family, once a tight-knit unit, began to fray at the edges under the immense strain. Elena, her grief a raw open wound, was a whirlwind of frantic energy, organizing search parties, hounding the police. Her hope a desperate flickering flame. Lorenzo, in contrast, retreated into a stoic silence, his face etched with a grief so profound it seemed to have stolen his voice. Sophia, trying to be the strong one, the bridge between her grieving parents and her shattered brother-in-law, was crumbling under the weight of it all. And then 6 weeks after Isabella had vanished into the autumn air, the knock on the door finally came. It wasn't a neighbor with a casserole or a friend with words of comfort. It was 2 detectives, their faces grim, their eyes filled with a pity that made Marco's blood run cold. One of the detectives, a man named Inspector Ricci, held a large clear plastic bag. Inside, carefully folded, was a piece of clothing. Marco's breath caught in his throat. He recognized it instantly. The delicate lace, the intricate beadwork, the soft ivory silk. It was Isabella's wedding dress. The dress she had looked so ethereal in, the dress that symbolized the beginning of their life together. But it was wrong. Horribly, terrifyingly wrong. The pristine silk was marred by a dark, ugly stain, a stain that spread across the bodice like a grotesque flower. "Signor Rossi," Inspector Ricci said, his voice gentle but firm. "We found this in a dumpster on the outskirts of the city. We've had it tested." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "The blood is a match for your wife." The world, which had been tilting for weeks, finally shattered. Marco stared at the blood-stained dress, the symbol of his greatest joy, now a harbinger of his deepest horror. The questions that had been whispering in the dark corners of his mind now roared to the forefront. Who would do this? And why? The mystery of Isabella's disappearance had just taken a sinister, terrifying turn, and the secrets that were about to be unearthed would not only destroy the memory of the woman he loved, but would also threaten to consume his entire family in their devastating wake. The investigation into the life of Isabella Rossi was about to begin, And what they would find would prove that in the intricate tapestry of family, some threads are woven with deceit, and some secrets are buried in graves of their own making. The search for a missing person was over. A murder investigation had just begun. And the prime suspect in the eyes of the public and the ever-watchful media was the grieving husband who was the last to see her alive. The nightmare was far from over. It was just beginning. The discovery of the blood-stained wedding dress sent a shockwave through the Rossi and Moretti families, shattering the fragile hope they had clung to for 6 agonizing weeks. The media frenzy which had begun to subside erupted with renewed ferocity. The narrative shifted from a tragic disappearance to a suspected homicide, and the spotlight, harsh and unforgiving, swiveled to Marco. He was the grieving husband, the last person to see Isabella alive, and in the court of public opinion, that made him a person of interest. Inspector Ricci and his partner Detective Gallo became frequent visitors to the small Florentine apartment that now felt more like a tomb than a home. Their questions, once sympathetic, now carried a subtle probing edge. They went over the timeline of October 12th again and again, dissecting every minute of Marco's day. "You say you were restoring a book all afternoon, Signor Rossi?" Ricci asked during one of their interviews, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Yes, a first edition of the Divine Comedy," Marco answered, his voice a hoarse whisper. The lack of sleep and constant stress had taken their toll. He was a shadow of his former self, his clothes hanging loosely on his gaunt frame. "Did anyone see you? Can anyone verify that you were in your workshop all afternoon?" Gallo pressed his tone, less patient than his partner's. "I work alone," Marco replied, a flicker of irritation cutting through his grief. "My clients drop off the books. I work on them. They pick them up. That's how it's always been." The detectives exchanged a look, a silent communication that did not go unnoticed by Marco. He was being treated like a suspect. His grief invalidated, his love for Isabella questioned. The injustice of it was a bitter pill to swallow. The strain was also taking a devastating toll on Isabella's family. Elena, who had once been Marco's staunchest defender, now looked at him with a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The media's relentless speculation, coupled with the police's pointed questions, had planted a seed of suspicion that was beginning to take root. "Why the wedding dress, Marco?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling. They were in the apartment, the silence thick with unspoken accusations. Of all things, why her wedding dress? It was stored in the attic. How would a stranger know to look for it? "I don't know, Elena," Marco said, his voice breaking. "I don't know." He wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all, but all he could muster was a weary, defeated sigh. Lorenzo, Isabella's father, remained a silent, imposing figure in the background. His grief was a quiet, corrosive force, and his rare pronouncements were like judgments from on high. "The police are just doing their job," he said, his voice flat, his eyes unreadable. "If you have nothing to hide, Marco, you have nothing to fear." Sophia, caught between her loyalty to her sister's husband and her parents' growing suspicions, was in an impossible position. She saw Marco's pain, his utter devastation, and she couldn't bring herself to believe he was capable of harming Isabella. But the questions lingered, unwelcome and insidious. The investigation, meanwhile, was unearthing details about Isabella's life that painted a more complex picture than the serene, happy wife and mother-to-be that Marco knew. The police, digging into her phone records and bank statements, discovered that in the months leading up to her disappearance, Isabella had made several large cash withdrawals, a total of over 20,000 euros. "Did you know about this, Signor Rossi?" Inspector Ricci asked, sliding the bank statements across the table. Marco stared at the numbers, a feeling of bewilderment washing over him. "No," he said, shaking his head. "We had a joint account. I never saw these withdrawals. Where would the money have gone?" The question hung in the air, another piece of a puzzle that was becoming increasingly convoluted. The police also found a series of text messages on Isabella's phone from a number they couldn't trace that were cryptic and vaguely threatening. "You can't run from this," one message read. "He will find you. The past always catches up. Read another. Do you know who might have been threatening your wife, Signor Rossi? Gallo asked, his tone accusatory. No, Marco said, his mind reeling. Isabella never mentioned any threats. She never seemed scared or worried. But as he said the words, a memory surfaced, a small, seemingly insignificant detail from a few weeks before she vanished. He had come home early from his workshop and found Isabella on the phone, her back to him. Her voice was low and hushed, and she seemed agitated. When she saw him, she had ended the call abruptly, a flicker of something, fear, annoyance, in her eyes. Just a wrong number, she had said, her smile a little too bright, a little too forced. At the time he had thought nothing of it. Now it seemed like a glaring red flag, another sign that his wife had been hiding a part of her life from him. The secrets didn't stop there. As the police delved deeper into Isabella's past, they uncovered a chapter of her life that she had never spoken of, a time before she met Marco, a time she had spent in Rome. It turned out that Isabella had been involved with a man named Alessandro Bellini, a charismatic but dangerous figure with known ties to organized crime. The relationship had ended badly, and according to a friend the police interviewed, Isabella had fled Rome to escape him. This revelation hit Marco like a physical blow. The woman he had loved, the woman he thought he knew so intimately, had a past he knew nothing about. A past that involved a dangerous man. A past that might have gotten her killed. The discovery of Alessandro Bellini shifted the focus of the investigation, at least partially, away from Marco. The police now had another potential suspect, a man with a motive and a history of violence. But he was a ghost, a phantom from a past Isabella had tried to bury. Finding him would not be easy. For Marco, this new information was both a relief and a source of profound pain. It meant that there was another explanation for what had happened to his wife, an explanation that didn't involve him being a monster. But it also meant that Isabella had kept a significant part of her life a secret from him. The foundation of their relationship, which he had believed to be built on honesty and trust, now seemed to be riddled with cracks. The family was further fractured by this news. Elena was horrified, her grief now mixed with a sense of betrayal. "Why didn't she tell us?" she cried, her voice raw with anguish. "We could have protected her." Lorenzo, ever the pragmatist, saw it differently. "She was ashamed," he said, his voice heavy. "She made a mistake and she was trying to outrun it." Sophia, however, felt a surge of anger. "So we're just going to blame her now?" she demanded, her eyes flashing. "She's the victim here. She was running from a monster and he finally caught up with her." The arguments became more frequent, the silences more fraught with tension. The shared grief that had once united them was now a wedge driving them apart. As the investigation continued, the police managed to trace the untraceable number from Isabella's phone. It belonged to a burner phone, but they were able to triangulate its last known location. A small cafe in a quiet piazza not far from Marco and Isabella's apartment. The owner of the cafe, a stout balding man named Giorgio, remembered Isabella. She had been a regular in the weeks before she disappeared. But she hadn't been alone. She had been meeting with a man. He was older, Giorgio told the police, well-dressed with a sad look in his eyes. He couldn't remember his name, but he remembered their conversations. They were quiet and tense and seemed to cause the pregnant woman a great deal of distress. The police showed Giorgio a picture of Alessandro Bellini. He shook his head. "No, that's not him. This man was different, gentler." The mystery had taken another turn. Isabella had not only been hiding a dangerous ex-boyfriend, but she had also been having secret meetings with an unknown man. The picture of the serene, happy pregnant woman was becoming increasingly blurred, replaced by a portrait of a woman with a complicated secret life. For Marco, each new revelation was a fresh stab of pain. He was no longer just grieving for his wife. He was grieving for the life he thought they had, for the woman he thought he knew. The blood-stained wedding dress was a symbol not just of her death, but of the death of their shared dreams, a love that he was beginning to realize was built on a foundation of lies. The cracks in the family were widening into chasms. The search for the truth was no longer just about finding Isabella's killer. It was about confronting the secrets and lies that had been festering beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect lives. And as the investigation delved deeper into the shadows of Isabella's past, they were about to uncover a truth far more shocking and devastating than any of them could have ever imagined. The real drama was just beginning to unfold. The revelation that Isabella had been meeting a mysterious older man sent the investigation spiraling in a new direction. While the hunt for the elusive Alessandro Bellini continued, Inspector Ricci and Detective Gallo now had another lead to follow, another thread to pull in the increasingly tangled web of Isabella's secret life. For Marco, the news was another blow to his already shattered reality. He replayed the past few months in his mind, searching for any clue, any sign that he had missed. Had Isabella seemed distracted? Had there been any unexplained absences? Any hushed phone calls he hadn't paid enough attention to? The image of her turning away from him, ending that phone call so abruptly, haunted him. It was a small moment, but it was now magnified, imbued with a sinister significance. He felt a growing sense of isolation. The police still viewed him with suspicion, and his relationship with Isabella's family was deteriorating by the day. Elena, once a source of comfort, now seemed to flinch at his touch. Lorenzo's silence was a constant heavy judgment. Only Sophia still offered a glimmer of support, but even she was struggling under the weight of her family's grief and the mounting pressure of the investigation. The media, of course, seized upon the new developments with renewed glee. The narrative of their grieving husband was now being supplanted by a more salacious story, a beautiful pregnant woman with a dark past, a dangerous ex-boyfriend, and a mysterious lover. Marco's face was splashed across the tabloids, his pained expression juxtaposed with headlines that screamed of betrayal and deceit. Meanwhile, the police were working tirelessly to identify the man from the cafe. They created a composite sketch based on Giorgio's description and began showing it around the neighborhood. It was a slow, painstaking process, but they finally got a break. A local librarian recognized the man. He was a regular at the library, a quiet, scholarly man named Antonio Giordano. The name meant nothing to Marco. He had never heard Isabella mention an Antonio Giordano. The police located Giordano's address and went to his apartment, a modest, book-filled flat in a quiet residential area. Antonio Giordano was a man in his late 60s with a gentle, melancholic air about him. He was a retired professor of art history, and when the police informed him of Isabella's death, his composure crumbled. He wept openly, a man consumed by a grief that seemed both profound and deeply personal. "I can't believe she's gone," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I should have done more to help her." The story he told the police was a bombshell, a revelation that would once again rewrite the narrative of Isabella's life and death. Antonio Giordano was not her lover. He was her father. Her biological father. The story was a long and complicated one, a tale of a youthful romance, a secret pregnancy, and a difficult choice. Elena, Isabella's mother, had had a brief, passionate affair with Antonio when they were both young students. When she discovered she was pregnant, she had made the difficult decision to end the relationship and raise the child with Lorenzo, who had been her steadfast, devoted friend. Lorenzo had agreed to raise Isabella as his own, and they had never told her the truth. But secrets, as the Rossi family was learning, have a way of coming to the surface. A few months ago, Antonio, recently widowed and feeling the weight of his mortality, had decided to find the daughter he had never known. He had hired a private investigator who had located Isabella in Florence. He had reached out to her, and after the initial shock, Isabella had agreed to meet him. Their secret meetings at the cafe had been her attempt to come to terms with this life-altering revelation, to get to know the man who was her biological father. This new information sent a fresh wave of shock and grief through the family. Elena was forced to confess her long-held secret to a stunned and devastated Lorenzo. The stoic, silent man was finally broken, his quiet grief erupting into a raw, painful display of anger and betrayal. The foundation of their marriage, which had seemed so solid, was revealed to be built on a lie. For Sophia, the news was a confusing mix of emotions. She felt a surge of sympathy for her mother for the difficult choice she had made as a young woman. But she also felt a deep sadness for her father, who had been deceived for so many years. and she grieved for her sister who had been carrying this heavy secret alone. Marco, listening to this story unfold at the police station, felt a profound sense of sorrow. He finally understood Isabella's agitation, her secret meetings, her large cash withdrawals. Antonio explained that Isabella had been helping him. He had fallen on hard times after his wife's long illness, and Isabella, out of a sense of compassion and a burgeoning sense of familial duty, had been giving him money to help him get back on his feet. The threatening text messages, however, remained a mystery. Antonio swore he had nothing to do with them. He had only wanted to know his daughter not to harm her. The revelation about Antonio Giordano cleared up some of the questions surrounding Isabella's final weeks, but it also opened up a new line of inquiry. The police now had to consider the possibility that her death was connected to this long-buried family secret. Had someone from Elena's or Lorenzo's past discovered the truth and sought revenge? The focus of the investigation now turned to Alessandro Bellini, the dangerous ex-boyfriend from Rome. The police intensified their search, believing that he was the most likely source of the threatening text messages. They discovered that he had recently been released from prison and had been trying to re-establish his criminal enterprise. They also learned that he had been asking about Isabella, trying to find out where she was. The theory was that Bellini had discovered Isabella was pregnant and had become obsessed with the idea that the child was his. The threatening messages were his way of trying to intimidate her, to force her to come back to him. The police finally got a lead on Bellini's whereabouts. An informant told them that he was hiding out in a run-down apartment building on the outskirts of Naples. A raid was organized, and a team of heavily armed officers stormed the building. They found Bellini, but it was too late. He was dead, a single gunshot wound to the chest. The scene was staged to look like a suicide, but the forensics team quickly determined that it was a professional hit. The death of Alessandro Bellini was another shocking twist in a case that was already overflowing with them. It seemed that the ghost from Isabella's past had been silenced, but by whom? Had he been killed by his criminal rivals, or was his death connected to Isabella's? The investigation was now more complicated than ever. They had a dead pregnant woman, a blood-stained wedding dress, a secret biological father, a dead gangster, ex-boyfriend, and a family that was imploding under the weight of its own secrets. For Marco, the world had become a surreal, nightmarish landscape. Every time he thought he was getting closer to the truth, it receded further into the distance, replaced by a new set of lies and deceptions. He was a man adrift in a sea of grief and confusion, with no land in sight. The police, however, were not giving up. They continued to dig, to sift through the wreckage of the Rossi family's lives, convinced that the key to solving Isabella's murder lay somewhere in the tangled mess of her past. And as they focused their attention back on the family, on the raw emotions and festering resentments that had been exposed, they began to suspect that the killer might not be a ghost from the past, but someone much closer to home. Someone who had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. The real monster, they were beginning to realize, might be one of their own. The investigation was about to take its most sinister and heartbreaking turn yet. The death of Alessandro Bellini, far from simplifying the investigation, only served to deepen the mystery. It was a dead end, a silencing of a voice that might have held some of the answers. The police were back to square one, with a growing list of questions and a shrinking list of suspects. The focus of the investigation now shifted back to the family, to the intricate web of relationships and resentments that had been laid bare. Inspector Ricci, a man with a keen understanding of human nature, knew that in cases like this, the truth was often buried under layers of love, jealousy, and betrayal. He started by re-interviewing the family members one by one, probing for inconsistencies, for any sign of deception. He started with Elena, a woman who was now a shadow of her former self, her fiery spirit extinguished by grief and guilt. "Tell me about your relationship with Lorenzo," Ricci asked, his voice gentle but firm, "after you told him about Antonio." Elena hesitated, her eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness. "It was difficult," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "He was hurt, angry. He felt like our whole life had been a lie." Did he blame you? Ricci pressed. He blamed everyone, she said, a flicker of her old fire returning. He blamed me. He blamed Antonio. He even blamed Isabella. He said she should have never agreed to meet him, that she had brought this trouble on all of us. This was a new piece of information. The stoic, silent Lorenzo was not just grieving. He was angry, and he was blaming his own daughter. Next, Ricci interviewed Sophia. She was defensive, fiercely protective of her family, but her loyalty was clearly being tested. My parents are good people, she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. They're just in pain. They're not thinking clearly. And Marco, Ricci asked, his gaze steady, how is he fitting into this new family dynamic? Sophia sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. It's awful, she said. My mother can barely look at him. My father treats him like he's a criminal. And Marco, he's just lost. He's trying to hold on, but he's all alone. The interview with Lorenzo was the most challenging. He was a man locked in a fortress of silence, his grief a shield that deflected all attempts to get through. I loved my daughter, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I would have done anything for her. But you were angry with her, Ricci said, his tone more of a statement than a question. You were angry that she was meeting with her biological father. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. She was naive, he said, his voice tight with a suppressed emotion that could have been anger or pain or both. She didn't understand the world. She trusted people too easily. As the interviews continued, a picture began to emerge of a family in turmoil. A family where resentment simmered beneath the surface, where love and anger were intertwined in a complex and dangerous dance. The police also continued to dig into the forensic evidence. They re-examined the blood-stained wedding dress, searching for any clue they might have missed. And they found something. A single strand of hair, not Isabella's, caught in the delicate beadwork of the bodice. The hair was sent for DNA testing, and the results came back with a shocking match. The hair did not belong to Marco or Antonio Giordano or Alessandro Bellini. It belonged to Sophia. The discovery sent a jolt through the investigation. Sophia, the quiet, supportive sister, the one who had seemed to be the glue holding the family together, was now a prime suspect. The police brought her in for questioning again. This time the atmosphere was different. The friendly, sympathetic facade was gone, replaced by a cold, hard professionalism. We found your hair on Isabella's wedding dress, Sophia. Inspector Ricci said, his voice devoid of warmth. Sophia's face went pale. What? That's impossible, she stammered. Her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Is it? Gallo countered, his voice sharp. Were you at Marco and Isabella's apartment on the day she disappeared? No, she said, shaking her head frantically. I was at work. I have colleagues who can verify that. Her alibi checked out. She had been at the art gallery where she worked as a curator all day. But the hair was a physical piece of evidence that could not be ignored. The police were now faced with a new puzzle. How did Sophia's hair get on the wedding dress? Had she been there at some point before or after the murder? Or was there another explanation? They decided to search Sophia's apartment. It was a small, tastefully decorated flat filled with books on art history and catalogs from various exhibitions. It seemed like the home of a quiet, intellectual woman, not a killer. But in her bedroom, tucked away in a drawer beneath a pile of sweaters, they found something that made their blood run cold. A small leather-bound diary. The diary was a record of Sophia's innermost thoughts and feelings, a place where she had poured out all the frustrations and resentments that she had kept hidden from the world. And it was a chilling read. The diary revealed that Sophia had been secretly in love with Marco for years. She had watched him fall in love with her sister, had stood by as they got married and started a life together, all the while nursing a silent, all-consuming jealousy. She wrote about her resentment of Isabella, of her seemingly perfect life, her effortless beauty, her easy happiness. She wrote about her frustration with her parents, who she felt had always favored her older sister. But the most disturbing entries were from the past few months. She wrote about her growing obsession with Marco, her fantasies of a life with him, a life where Isabella was no longer in the picture. "He deserves better than her," she wrote in one entry. "She has her secrets. She's not the perfect wife he thinks she is. He deserves someone who will love him unconditionally, someone like me." The diary was emotive, a dark, twisted confession of a love that had curdled into a dangerous obsession. But it wasn't a confession of murder. When confronted with the diary, Sophia broke down completely. She confessed to her love for Marco, to her jealousy of her sister, but she vehemently denied killing her. "I loved her," she sobbed, her body racked with guilt and shame. "I was jealous of her, yes, but I would never hurt her. She was my sister." The police were skeptical. They had a motive, they had a physical link to the crime scene, and they had a suspect who was emotionally unstable. But they still didn't have a confession. And there were still pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. How did Sophia, who was at work all day, manage to kill her sister, dispose of the body, and then plant the blood-stained wedding dress? The investigation had reached a critical point. They were closer than ever to the truth, but it was a truth that was more shocking and more tragic than they could have ever imagined. The focus of the investigation now narrowed to one crucial question: was Sophia a spurned lover who had snapped and killed her sister in a fit of jealous rage, or was she just another victim in a much larger, more sinister game? The police were about to uncover the final devastating piece of the puzzle, a secret that had been hidden in plain sight all along, a secret that would not only solve the mystery of Isabella's death, but would also destroy what was left of the once happy family. The real drama was about to reach its shattering climax. The discovery of Sophia's diary and her secret obsession with Marco threw the investigation into a frenzy. The media, which had been circling the story like vultures, descended with renewed vigor. The narrative of the grieving sister was now replaced with the tantalizing story of a Cain and Abel-like betrayal, a sisterly love twisted into a deadly jealousy. For Marco, the revelation was another disorienting blow. He looked at Sophia, the woman who had been his friend, his confidant, his sister-in-law, and saw a stranger. The kindness and support she had shown him now seemed manipulative, her grief a carefully constructed performance. The thought that she might have been responsible for Isabella's death was a betrayal so profound it was almost incomprehensible. The family, already fractured and broken, was completely shattered. Elena, who had already lost one daughter, was now faced with the possibility that her other daughter was a murderer. The weight of it was too much to bear. She retreated into a world of silent, inconsolable grief, a ghost in her own home. Lorenzo, however, reacted with a surprising ferocity. He refused to believe that Sophia was guilty. "She's not a killer," he insisted, his voice raw with a father's desperate conviction. "She's just a mixed-up kid. She loved her sister." The police, however, were building a strong case against Sophia. They had a motive. They had a physical link to the crime scene, and they had a suspect who was emotionally volatile. But there were still nagging inconsistencies, pieces of the puzzle that refused to fit. The biggest problem was Sophia's alibi. She had been at the art gallery all day on October 12th, and her colleagues had confirmed it. It seemed impossible that she could have committed the crime. Inspector Ricci, a man who trusted his gut as much as he trusted the evidence, felt that something was still off. He decided to go back to the beginning to re-examine every piece of evidence, every statement, every timeline. He was looking for something small, something that had been overlooked, a tiny crack in the carefully constructed wall of lies and deception. He started with the wedding dress. It had been found in a dumpster on the outskirts of the city, a location that was not on any of Sophia's regular routes. It was a detail that had been bothering him from the beginning. Why would she go so far out of her way to dispose of it? He decided to visit the location again, to walk the area to see if there was anything he had missed. It was a desolate industrial area. a place of abandoned warehouses and graffiti-covered walls. As he was walking, he noticed something. A small independent bookstore tucked away between a derelict factory and a boarded-up shop. It was the kind of place that would have interested Marco, a man who loved old books. On a hunch, Ricci went inside. The owner, an elderly man with thick glasses, remembered Marco. He had been a customer for years. "He was in here about a month ago," the old man said, "looking for a rare edition of Petrarch's sonnets." Ricci's heart started to pound. He pulled out a calendar and pointed to the date. October 12th. The old man squinted at the calendar. "Yes," he said. "That's the day. I remember because he seemed so agitated, so upset, not like his usual self at all." The alibi that had seemed so solid was beginning to crumble. Marco had not been in his workshop all afternoon as he had claimed. He had been on the other side of the city, near the place where the wedding dress had been found. Ricci now had a new line of inquiry. He went back to the police station and pulled the security camera footage from the area around the bookstore. And he found what he was looking for. A grainy black and white image of Marco's car driving away from the industrial area on the afternoon of October 12th. The timeline was tight, but it was possible. He could have driven to the industrial area, disposed of the dress, and then driven back to his apartment before his in-laws arrived. The investigation now turned its full force on Marco. The grieving husband, the man who had seemed so devastated by his wife's disappearance, was now the prime suspect. They brought him in for questioning again. This time there was no pretense of sympathy. They laid out the evidence in front of him, the security camera footage, the bookstore owner's statement, the lies about his whereabouts. Marco's composure, which had been so carefully maintained for weeks, finally shattered. He stared at the evidence, his face a mask of disbelief. And then he began to talk. The story he told was a tragic, convoluted tale of a marriage that had been slowly unraveling, of a love that had been eroded by secrets and lies. He confessed that he had discovered Isabella's secret meetings with Antonio Giordano. He had followed her, had seen them together at the cafe. He had confronted her, and they had had a terrible fight. "She told me everything," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of anger and pain. "About Antonio, about her past with Bellini, about the money she had been giving him. She had been lying to me for months." In a fit of rage and betrayal, he had packed a bag and had told her he was leaving. He had driven aimlessly for hours, his mind in a turmoil. He had ended up at the bookstore, a place that had always brought him comfort. But he swore he had not killed her. "When I came back to the apartment," he said, his voice breaking, "she was gone." He had panicked. He had assumed that she had left him, that she had gone to be with her real father. He had been ashamed, humiliated, and he had lied to the police, to her family, to everyone. The story was plausible, but it was also self-serving. It explained his lies, but it didn't absolve him. And then the forensics team came back with another piece of evidence, another shocking twist in a case that was already full of them. They had re-examined the hair found on the wedding dress, this time using a more advanced DNA sequencing technique. The hair did not belong to Sophia. It belonged to Elena. The investigation had taken another sharp, sickening turn. Elena, the grieving mother, the woman who had seemed so consumed by her loss, was now a suspect. The police went to her house, but she was gone. She had packed a bag and disappeared. Lorenzo was frantic, convinced that she had done something terrible to herself. A manhunt was launched, and after a frantic 24-hour search, they found her. She was at a small, secluded hotel on the coast, registered under a false name. When the police entered her room, she was sitting on the bed, staring out at the sea. She was calm, eerily so. And she was ready to confess. The story she told was the final devastating piece of the puzzle, a story of a mother's love twisted into a tragic, misguided act of protection. She had known about Isabella's meetings with Antonio. She had been terrified that the secret she had kept for so long would come out, that it would destroy her family, that it would ruin her daughter's life. On the afternoon of October 12th, after Marco had stormed out, Elena had gone to the apartment to talk to Isabella. She had begged her to stop seeing Antonio, to forget about the past. But Isabella had refused. She had been determined to have a relationship with her biological father. They had argued, their voices rising in a crescendo of anger and desperation. Elena, in a state of panic, had grabbed Isabella by the arms, shaking her, trying to make her see reason. And then the unthinkable had happened. Isabella, 8 months pregnant, and already in a fragile state, had stumbled backward. She had hit her head on the sharp corner of a marble-topped table. She had fallen to the floor unconscious, a trickle of blood seeping from a wound on her head. Elena, horrified, had tried to revive her, but it was too late. Isabella was gone. The story was a tragic accident, a mother's desperate act that had gone horribly, fatally wrong. But what happened next was a cold, calculated act of self-preservation. Panicked and terrified, Elena had decided to cover up the crime. She had enlisted the help of the one person she knew she could trust, the one person who had always been her silent, steadfast protector, her husband Lorenzo. The final shocking truth was about to be revealed, a truth that would prove that in the dark, twisted world of the Rossi family, nothing was as it seemed. The real monster was not a jealous sister or a spurned lover or a ghost from the past. It was a parent's love twisted into a deadly, unforgivable sin. The final act of the tragedy was about to unfold. The interrogation room was cold and silent. Across the metal table, Elena Rossi sat with an unnerving calm, her gaze fixed on a point beyond the walls. She was ready to talk. Her voice, when it came, was a monotone whisper, recounting the events of that fateful afternoon. After Marco had stormed out, Elena had gone to the apartment, desperate to reason with Isabella. She had begged her daughter to end the meetings with Antonio Giordano, terrified that the secret she had guarded for nearly 30 years would shatter their family. Isabella, fiercely independent, refused. She wanted to know her biological father. The argument escalated, their voices raw with a lifetime of unspoken tensions. In a fit of panicked desperation, Elena grabbed her daughter's arms, shaking her. "You don't understand what you're doing," she had screamed. It happened in an instant. Isabella stumbled backward, off balance. The sharp marble corner of a console table met her head with a sickening crack. She collapsed to the floor, and in that horrifying moment of silence, Elena knew her daughter and her unborn grandchild were gone. Panic gave way to a cold, primal instinct for self-preservation. She didn't call an ambulance. She called Lorenzo. He arrived to the horrific scene and without a word understood what he had to do. His stoic devotion to his wife twisted into a new dark purpose to protect her at all costs. Together they concocted a chilling narrative of a violent murder. They hid Isabella's body in a hidden wine cellar in their basement, a tomb no one knew existed. Then came the masterstroke of their deception: the wedding dress. It was Lorenzo's idea, a piece of theater designed to inflame the media and point the investigation toward a crime of passion, a crime Marco could be blamed for. Elena retrieved the dress and with trembling hands stained the ivory silk with her own daughter's blood. Lorenzo then drove to the city's industrial outskirts and tossed the bag into a dumpster, a calculated act to create a trail of false clues. Her confession unraveled the entire mystery. It was Elena's hair on the dress. Marco's lies about his whereabouts and Sophia's jealous diary had been convenient distractions that made them perfect scapegoats. Based on her words, police found Isabella's remains. The autopsy confirmed a tragic accident, but the cover-up was a cold, deliberate crime. Elena and Lorenzo Rossi were arrested, charged with obstruction of justice and desecration of a body. The news exploded across the city. The monsters weren't a jilted lover or a ghost from the past. They were a mother and father whose possessive love had become a destructive force, leading them to bury one child to save themselves. The convictions of Elena and Lorenzo Rossi brought no closure, only a hollow, aching emptiness. The media circus moved on, but for those left in the wreckage, the aftermath was a life sentence of silent suffering. Marco sold the apartment, a tomb of memories he could no longer inhabit. He moved to a small coastal town seeking anonymity from the shadow of the tragedy. He returned to restoring old books, finding a quiet solace in mending what was broken, though he knew he himself was beyond repair. A changed man, he was haunted not only by the loss of his wife and child, but by the agonizing question of whether he had ever truly known Isabella at all. Sophia was left to pick up the pieces of a family shattered by betrayal. Her visits to her parents in prison were strained rituals of grief and unspoken accusations. She could not forgive them. Their love had been a monstrous destructive force that had stolen her sister and her own innocence. Abandoning her career, she dedicated herself to a foundation for victims of hidden abuse, a desperate attempt to create meaning from the senselessness. Antonio Giordano, the unwitting catalyst, retreated into a life of solitary guilt. He had found his daughter only to lose her, and he would forever be tormented by the thought that if he had never come looking for her, she might still be alive. The city of Florence eventually forgot Isabella Rossi. But for the survivors, the scars remained a permanent reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating power of secrets. The story ends not with justice, but with a profound lingering sadness. A husband mourning a stranger, a sister betrayed by her parents, and a family destroyed from within by a love that had become an unforgivable sin. The drama was over, but the suffering was eternal. Conclusion for YouTube video. The story of Isabella Rossi is a chilling reminder that the most devastating secrets are often hidden within the four walls of a family home. It's a tragedy born not from the hands of a stranger in the dark, but from a love that became twisted, possessive, and ultimately deadly. What began as a mother's desperate attempt to protect a long-buried secret spiraled into a web of deceit that ensnared everyone she loved, leading to an accidental death and a cold-blooded cover-up that tore a family to shreds. The real horror wasn't just the loss of a vibrant young woman and her unborn child, but the realization that the people she should have been safest with were the architects of her demise. Thank you for joining us on this heartbreaking journey. The flash of a smartphone camera, the soft chime of a social media notification, and a single three-word post that detonated a new mother's world. In the sterile, quiet peace of a maternity ward, while Isabella Rossi held their newborn son Leo, for the very first time her husband Marcus Thorne was celebrating his own kind of delivery. He typed the words, "Free at last," into the digital ether, a triumphant cry for all their friends and family to see. He thought it was a joke. He thought it was harmless. By the time the sun rose the next morning, he would learn in the most brutal way possible that his freedom had just cost him everything. The air in room 304 of St. Jude's Medical Center was thick with a sacred silence. It was 2:17 a.m., a time when the world outside held its breath, but inside this small, sanitized space, a new world had just begun. Isabella Rossi, her body a beautiful aching testament to the marathon of childbirth, held her son Leo against her chest. His tiny wrinkled fingers were curled around her thumb, his breath a warm, rhythmic puff against her skin. Every cliché she had ever rolled her eyes at was suddenly overwhelmingly true. The rush of love was a tidal wave wiping away the memory of pain, the exhaustion, the fear. There was only this perfect, fragile 7-pound, 3-ounce universe in her arms. Marcus was on the other side of the room, a hulking, joyous silhouette against the dim glow of the city lights filtering through the window. He'd been a rock, a surprisingly steady presence through the 17 hours of labor. He'd held her hand, fed her ice chips, and whispered encouragement when her resolve faltered. He'd wept when Leo's first cry cut through the tension in the delivery room. Now he was buzzing with a different kind of energy, a restless, kinetic hum. I'm gonna let everyone know he's here," Marcus had said, his voice husky with emotion. "Gotta update the family. They've been blowing up my phone." Isabella had simply nodded, too lost in the milky scent of her newborn to truly register the words. She heard the soft clicks of his phone's keyboard, saw the familiar blue-white light illuminate his face. She smiled faintly. Let him have his moment. He was a father. They were a family. She drifted in a haze of oxytocin and fatigue, her world shrinking to the rise and fall of Leo's chest. A nurse, a kind woman named Carol with gentle hands and a softer voice, came in to check her vitals. Everything was a gentle murmur, a soft, focused dream. It wasn't until Carol had left and the room had settled back into its quiet hum that Isabella's own phone lying on the bedside table buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. A cascade of notifications, insistent and sharp. Curiosity, faint at first, pricked through her blissful fog. Maybe it was her sister Sophia, who was on a flight back from a work trip in London and desperate for news. With a tired grunt, Isabella shifted Leo slightly and reached for the device. Her thumb, clumsy with fatigue, swiped the screen open. The notifications were from Facebook, Instagram, a dozen different group chats. The first thing she saw was a photo. It was a selfie Marcus had taken just moments ago. He was grinning a wild, almost manic grin, his hair disheveled, his eyes wide with adrenaline. In the background, out of focus, was the back of her head and the swaddled bundle of their son. It was the caption, however, that made the air in her lungs turn to ice. 3 simple words floating innocently above the image. Free at last. Isabella stared. She read the words once. Twice. A third time. There had to be a mistake. A typo. An autocorrect error of catastrophic proportions. Free. What was he free from? The pregnancy. The waiting her. Their son. Her heart began to beat a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. The sacred silence of the room was shattered by the roaring in her ears. She clicked on the post to see the comments, a masochistic impulse she couldn't control. His college buddy Kevin had commented, "Ha ha ha, the old ball and chain finally delivered. Welcome to the other side, man." A cousin she barely knew. Brenda wrote, "Oh, Marcus, that's not a very nice thing to say about your wife and new baby," followed by a string of laughing emojis. But it was the comment from Chloe Vance that felt like a physical blow. Chloe, his business partner, the woman whose name had appeared on his phone at all hours for the last 6 months. The woman he'd sworn was just a colleague, a brilliant tech mind who was helping him launch his new venture. Chloe had written congratulations on closing the biggest deal of your life. Both of them. The winking emoji was a tiny digital dagger. Isabella's breath hitched. A cold dread far more chilling than any labor pain seeped into her bones. The late-night meetings, the hushed phone calls he'd take in the other room. The sudden business trips on weekends. She had pushed her suspicions down, chalking them up to her own hormonal anxiety, her insecurity about her changing body. She had trusted him. She had chosen to believe in the man who had held her hand and cried at the birth of their son. And he had posted this, for the world to see. He hadn't posted, "Meet our beautiful son Leo." He hadn't posted, "Isabella was a warrior." He had posted a triumphant cry of liberation, a joke shared with another woman about a deal. What deal? What could possibly compete with the birth of his child? She looked across the room. Marcus was oblivious, still scrolling through his phone, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. He was in his own world, celebrating a victory she wasn't privy to. He was a stranger. The wave of love she'd felt for him just minutes before receded, leaving behind a barren, frozen shore. The warmth in her chest was gone, replaced by a glacial calm. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of emotion, became sharp and clear, honed to a single point of purpose. She had a background in forensic accounting, a career she'd put on hold to start a family. She knew numbers, she knew contracts, she knew how to protect assets. And she knew that the bulk of their shared finances, the down payment on their house, their savings, their investment portfolio was tied to the inheritance her grandmother had left her. An inheritance that was in a joint account, but one for which she was the primary signatory. An old piece of advice from her father, a notoriously shrewd and cynical businessman, echoed in her mind. Isabella, in love and in business, never leave yourself exposed. Hope for the best, but structure for the worst. She had hoped for the best. Now she had to structure for the worst. While Marcus was basking in the glow of his mysterious freedom, Isabella Rossi's new mother, betrayed wife, began to work. Her fingers, no longer clumsy, moved with precision across her phone's screen. She opened her banking app. She navigated through security protocols and two-factor authentications. Her face, illuminated by the screen, was a mask of cold resolve. She found the master account, the one from which all others, his personal checking, his business credit card, their joint savings, were fed. She saw the option she was looking for: initiate full security freeze. A temporary measure designed for suspected fraud. It would lock every cent, block every transaction, deny every withdrawal. It would take a phone call to a 24-hour premium service line to make it ironclad. With Leo sleeping soundly on her chest, his innocence a stark contrast to the calculated act she was about to commit, Isabella pressed the button. A confirmation screen appeared. "Are you sure you want to freeze all activity on these accounts?" She didn't hesitate. She pressed confirm. Then she picked up her phone and began to dial the number for the bank's Platinum Fraud Protection Services. A soft, automated voice answered on the other end. "Thank you for calling Sterling Financial's Premium Client Services," the voice chirped. "All our representatives are currently busy. Your estimated wait time is 10 minutes. Isabella leaned her head back against the stiff hospital pillows and closed her eyes. The phone pressed to her ear. 10 minutes. She had all the time in the world. Marcus had his freedom. She was about to give him a taste of what it truly meant. The first rays of dawn painted the gray city skyline in hues of soft pink and orange. But inside room 304, the atmosphere remained stubbornly frozen. Isabella had barely slept. She had dozed in fits and starts, her body demanding rest, while her mind replayed the three-word caption and Chloe's winking emoji on an endless, torturous loop. Each time she woke, the first thing she felt was the solid weight of betrayal, a physical presence in the room. Her call to the bank had been swift and clinical. She'd used the right keywords: unauthorized activity, potential, third-party compromise, spousal financial malfeasance, and the representative, professionally alarmed, had erected a digital fortress around their assets that would require a court order and 3 blood oaths to penetrate. Marcus, on the other hand, had slept like a log. He was sprawled in the uncomfortable recliner, snoring softly, his phone lying on his chest. He looked peaceful, innocent. The image was so discordant with the chaos he had unleashed that Isabella felt a fresh wave of sickness roll through her. When he finally stirred, it was with a groan and a stretch, a man waking from a satisfying sleep. He blinked, looked at Isabella and the sleeping baby in the bassinet beside her bed, and a dopey, happy grin spread across his face. "Morning, Mama," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "How are my 2 favorite people in the world?" Isabella just looked at him. Her expression was utterly blank. The warmth he expected, the shared smile of new parents, wasn't there. There was just a flat, dispassionate stare. He seemed to notice the chill. "You okay? You look tired." "I am tired," she said, her voice monotone. "Right, of course. Stupid question." He rubbed his face, trying to wake himself up. "I'm going to go get you the best coffee in a 5-mile radius, and one of those giant croissants from that French place. You deserve it. You deserve everything." He leaned over to kiss her, but she subtly turned her head so his lips met her cheek. It was a small, almost imperceptible rejection, but it stopped him cold. He asked, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" "Just go get the coffee, Marcus," she said. Her eyes focused on Leo. Puzzled but undeterred, he grabbed his wallet and keys. "Okay, back in a flash. Don't miss me too much." He blew a kiss and slipped out the door. Isabella waited. She counted the seconds. She knew exactly what was about to happen. 30 minutes later, Marcus returned. He was not carrying coffee or a croissant. His face, which had been full of dopey joy, was now a mask of confusion and irritation. "This is so weird," he said, slamming his wallet on the small table. "My card was declined." Isabella didn't look at him. Oh yeah. The debit card. Declined. So I tried the Amex. Declined. Tried the Visa. Declined. The barista looked at me like I was a complete deadbeat. I had to pay with the emergency 20 I keep in my phone case. What the hell is going on? Did you get a fraud alert or something? Now she turned to look at him. Her gaze was steady and cold. Yes, she said. I did. He let out a relieved sigh. Oh, thank God. I thought I was going crazy. So you sorted it out? I sorted it out, she confirmed. She picked up her phone from the bedside table and held it out to him. His Facebook page was still open. The post was right there now with over 100 likes and dozens of comments. What am I looking at? He asked, confused. Read it, she commanded. He squinted at the screen. Free at last. Yeah, it's funny, right? A little gallows humor after 17 hours of... His voice trailed off as he saw the look on her face. It was not the face of a woman who found anything funny. Funny, she repeated, her voice dangerously low. You thought that was funny, Marcus. You thought broadcasting to every single person we know that you felt free the moment your son was born was... funny. He finally started to grasp the magnitude of his error. A panicked look flashed in his eyes. Oh, babe, no. It was just a joke. A stupid joke. It didn't mean anything. You know, like free from the waiting. That's all. Is that what Chloe Vance thought it meant? Isabella shot back, her voice like cracking ice. Or was she in on the joke with her little winking face? Congratulations on closing the biggest deal of your life. Both of them. What deal, Marcus? What was the other big deal you closed last night while I was pushing your son out of my body? Marcus's face went pale. Chloe. That was about work. Project Chimera. It finally got funded yesterday. The term sheets were signed while you were in labor. That's the deal. That's all she meant. It's what I've been working on for 2 years. It's for us. For our future. Our future. Isabella let out a laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that held no humor. You mean the future you were so happy to be free from? You stood there in this room while I was holding our baby for the first time, and you weren't celebrating with me. You were celebrating with her. You made the birth of our son a footnote in your business announcement. That's not true, he pleaded, his voice rising in desperation. I was overwhelmed. I was happy about everything. Leo, the deal. It all happened at once. I wasn't thinking straight. No. For the first time I think you were, Isabella said, her calm returning. You showed me exactly what your priorities are. And so, I've decided to set my own. What does that mean? He asked, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Why were my cards declined? Because I froze them, she stated as if discussing the weather. All of them. The checking accounts, the savings, the credit cards you pay off from the joint account, the one that's funded by my inheritance. Every single dollar is locked up. He stared at her, his mouth agape. He looked like she had just confessed to a murder. You what? You can't do that. That's our money. No, Marcus, she corrected him, her voice precise and cutting. It's my money that you have had the privilege of accessing. A privilege you have demonstrated you no longer deserve. You want to be free at last. Congratulations. You're free. Free from any and all financial support from me. Now get out. Get out, he stammered. Isabella, this is insane. I'm the father of your child. We just had a baby. And you sullied it. She whispered, the mask of calm cracking for just a second to reveal the raw wound beneath. You took the most sacred moment of my life, and you defaced it with a cheap joke and a secret celebration. I don't know who you are right now, and I will not have you in this room. I'm not leaving you. You are, she said, her voice regaining its steel. She reached for the call button to summon the nurse. If you don't walk out of that door in the next 10 seconds, I will have security escort you out. And I will tell them I am in fear for my safety. Do you really want to add that to your list of accomplishments from last night? The threat hung in the air, ugly and potent. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw no trace of the woman he thought he knew. The warm, loving Isabella was gone. In her place was a stranger with eyes of ice and a will of iron. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, a trait she'd inherited from her formidable father, Lorenzo Rossi, and knew he had lost. For now. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly bewildered, Marcus Thorne backed away. He grabbed his wallet and keys, his movements stiff and jerky. He opened the door, paused, and looked back at her one last time. "I will fix this. He vowed, his voice cracking. "I will make you understand." She didn't answer. She had already turned away from him, her attention focused entirely on the tiny sleeping baby in the bassinet, the only family she could trust right now. The door clicked shut, leaving Marcus alone in the hallway, a free man with empty pockets and a life in ruins. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway seemed unnaturally bright, buzzing with an accusatory hum. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the click of the closing door echoing in his ears. He felt like he'd been hit by a bus he never saw coming. One minute he was on top of the world, a new father and a successful entrepreneur on the cusp of greatness. The next he was exiled, broke, and accused of, he wasn't even sure what. Betrayal, insensitivity, financial malfeasance. It was all a tangled, horrifying mess. His first instinct was to panic. Project Chimera, his AI-driven logistics software, had just secured its second round of funding. The deal was done, but the initial capital transfer to cover immediate operational costs, server rentals, developer salaries, a down payment on a new office space was supposed to come from their joint savings. It was a bridge fund, a few $100,000 he needed now before the venture capital money was formally wired in a week. Without it, he would be in breach of his new partnership agreement. He would look like a fool, or worse, a fraud. He would lose everything he'd worked for. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, and scrolled to his banking app. Isabella hadn't been exaggerating. Every account was flagged with a bright red banner. Account frozen. Contact institution. He was locked out. Completely. He needed an ally, a voice of reason. He dialed his best friend David Chen. David was a level-headed corporate lawyer, the yin to Marcus's often impulsive yang. "Dave," Marcus said, his voice ragged. I've screwed up in a way that might be like historically bad." "Marcus? What's wrong? Is the baby okay? Is Isabella okay?" "The baby's perfect. Isabella she's declared war on me." Pacing the hallway, Marcus recounted the entire story. The birth, the elation, the post, the comment from Chloe, the confrontation, the frozen accounts. He relayed it all from his perspective, a monumentally stupid but innocent mistake that had been blown into a declaration of marital treason. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Dave, you there?" "Yeah, I'm here," David said slowly. "I'm just processing the sheer unadulterated stupidity of what you did. Marcus, let me get this straight. Your wife, after 17 hours of labor, is holding your newborn child for the first time, and you post a selfie with the caption, 'Free at last.'" "It was a joke," Marcus insisted, his voice cracking. "To who? For who? What part of that is funny?" David's voice was uncharacteristically sharp. "Forget the money for a second. Put yourself in her shoes. She's exhausted, hormonal, vulnerable, and probably feeling a love so overwhelming it's terrifying. And the first thing she sees from her partner, her co-pilot in this, is a public declaration of his own liberation. It's not just insensitive, man. It's cruel. It communicates that while she was going through a life-altering, body-altering ordeal, you saw it as a prison sentence you just got paroled from." Marcus leaned his head against the cool wall of the corridor. Hearing it from David stripped of his own self-justification made it sound so much worse. I didn't mean it like that. It doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what you did. And this Chloe person commenting with a winky face. Marcus, what were you thinking? You've been telling Izzy for months that Chloe is just a colleague. And then this. It's a mountain of circumstantial evidence and you handed it to her on a silver platter. So what do I do? Marcus asked, his desperation mounting. The money, Dave. The Chimera deal will collapse if I can't access that capital. Forget Chimera, David said firmly. Chimera is a symptom, not the disease. You don't have a financial problem right now. You have a trust problem. You don't go to her asking for money. You go to her begging for forgiveness. You need to stop thinking like a CEO trying to solve a cash flow issue and start thinking like a husband who just shattered his wife's heart. Meanwhile, in the quiet sanctuary of room 304, Isabella was fortifying her defenses. The first person she called after Marcus left was her older sister, Sophia. Sophia Rossi was a partner at a top-tier litigation firm in New York. She was sharp, fiercely protective, and possessed a near-pathological intolerance for nonsense, especially from men who hurt her little sister. Isabella, her voice trembling but determined, told her everything. She didn't have to embellish. The facts were damning enough. He did what Sophia's voice crackled with rage over the phone. I'm booking the next flight to you. No screw that I'm chartering a plane. I'll be there in 5 hours. Soph, you don't have to. The hell I don't. Sophia cut her off. Isabella, you did absolutely the right thing by freezing the accounts. Absolutely. In fact, it might not be enough. Did you know the seed money for his little project Chimera came from that portfolio Grandma left us? I knew he invested some of it. Yes, Isabella admitted. He leveraged a significant portion of it. I looked into it a few months ago because I didn't like the sound of it. And who is this Chloe Vance? Send me her full name. Isabella did. Within 30 minutes, Sophia's network was at work. She had a private investigator she kept on retainer for contentious divorce cases do a deep dive. The initial report came back while Isabella was trying to get Leo to latch for a feeding. Okay, listen to this, Sophia said, her voice grim. Chloe Vance, co-founder and CTO of Thorn Dynamics, which is the official name of his company. They registered it 6 months ago. Before that, she was fired from a major tech firm for, get this, an inappropriate relationship with a senior executive. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. Are you serious? Dead serious. It was settled out of court with an NDA, but the investigator has his sources. Furthermore, I'm looking at travel manifests. Marcus took a business trip to a tech conference in Austin 3 months ago. Guess who was also registered as an attendee and staying at the same hotel? Chloe Vance. There are photos on the conference website of a cocktail reception. They're standing very close together. He has his hand on the small of her back. Each word was another shovelful of dirt on the grave of her marriage. Every lie, every half-truth, every time he'd said, "Don't worry, it's just work," now felt like a deliberate, calculated deception. The social media post wasn't a mistake. It was a Freudian slip of epic proportions. He was celebrating his new life, a life with a successful business, and very possibly a new partner to go with it. Just then, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number she dreaded and revered in equal measure, her father, Lorenzo Rossi. Sophia must have called him. Isabella. His voice boomed, a force of nature that had intimidated CEOs and politicians for 40 years. Sophia told me, "I'm sending my jet. Pack your things. You and my grandson are coming home to New York. As for that boy you married, my lawyers will descend on him so fast he won't have time to update his Facebook status. We will gut him. We will take his company, his reputation, everything. He will be lucky to get a job cleaning toilets." "Papa, wait." Isabella said, her head spinning. The force of her family's protective rage was a comfort, but it was also suffocating. "Leo can't travel yet. I need a minute to think." "There is nothing to think about. Lorenzo thundered. He humiliated you. He humiliated our family. You cut out the cancer before it spreads. That is what we do. Papa, please. Isabella begged, tears finally starting to well in her eyes. Just give me a day. I need to handle this my way first. There was a long, disapproving sigh on the other end. Fine. You have 24 hours to be sensible. Then I handle it my way. I love you, my daughter. Be strong. He hung up. Isabella sat there, the weight of it all pressing down on her. Her husband's betrayal, her sister's righteous fury, her father's promise of annihilation. And in the middle of this swirling vortex was tiny, perfect Leo sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the war being waged around him. She looked at the preliminary report from Sophia's investigator again. The photo from the Austin conference. Marcus's hand on Chloe's back. It was so casual, so proprietary. The freeze on the accounts no longer felt like an act of anger. It felt like an act of survival. David Chin had been wrong. This wasn't just a trust problem. It was a financial problem, a legal problem, and a deeply personal one. And Isabella was beginning to realize the web of suspicion was far more tangled and venomous than even she had imagined. Humbled and terrified, Marcus spent the next 12 hours in a self-imposed exile at a cheap motel near the airport, paid for with the last of his emergency cash. The garish floral bedspread and the constant roar of jet engines were a fitting backdrop for the wreckage of his life. David's words had hit their mark. He had been an idiot, a colossal, self-absorbed fool. His focus on the Chimera deal had been so all-consuming that he'd developed a dangerous tunnel vision, seeing his family not as the reason for his ambition, but as something that existed on a parallel track to it. He knew explaining wouldn't be enough. Apologies were just words, and he had already shown how little his words could be trusted. He had to show her. He had to prove that Project Chimera wasn't some sordid secret life with Chloe, but a legitimate, albeit all-consuming venture meant to secure their future. He spent the rest of the day gathering his ammunition. He drove to his small shared office space, a place Isabella had never visited, and began printing documents. The articles of incorporation for Thorne Dynamics. The detailed business plan he'd spent a year perfecting. The complex schematics for the AI routing algorithm. And most importantly, the entire 200-page venture capital funding agreement with Sterling March Capital. He printed out email chains with the investors' communication logs and the final signed term sheets that had arrived at 1:30 a.m. less than an hour before Leo was born. He even printed his and Chloe's travel receipts from the Austin conference, showing they were in separate rooms on different floors, a flimsy defense perhaps. But it was all he had. He organized everything into a heavy 3-ring binder, a physical manifestation of his supposed truth. It was his grand gesture, his only hope. By evening, he was back at the hospital. He felt like a condemned man walking to his own execution. He took a deep breath and knocked softly on the door to room 304. It was Isabella who answered, not a nurse. She was out of bed, moving slowly, but with a newfound strength. Her face was pale. Her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, but the cold resolve was still there. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her voice flat. She made no move to let him in. I didn't come to ask for anything," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual confidence. "Not for money, not even for you to let me in. I need you to see this. I need you to understand what the deal was." He held out the heavy binder. "Everything is in here. The business plan, the contracts, the emails. Chloe is the CTO. She built the core technology. I handle the business and fundraising. That's it. That's all it is. I was under immense pressure. The investors were about to walk. We finally got them to sign last night right before Leo came. I was euphoric and stupid. And I posted that awful thing without thinking about how it would look, how it would hurt you. It was about being free from the fear of failure is. Not from you. Never from you." He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not forgiveness, but a sliver of curiosity. She hesitated, then took the heavy binder from him. "I'll look at it," she said, her tone non-committal. "That's all I can promise." She closed the door, leaving him once again alone in the hallway. Inside the room, Isabella sat down heavily in the recliner Marcus had occupied the night before. Her sister Sophia had arrived an hour ago, a whirlwind of expensive luggage and righteous anger. She was currently holding Leo glaring at the door as if she could incinerate Marcus with her gaze alone. "What is that?" Sophia demanded, nodding at the binder. "His explanation," Isabella said, placing it on the small table. She felt a strange reluctance to open it. Part of her wanted her suspicions to be true to justify the clean, righteous anger she felt. But a deeper part, a part that still remembered the man she had loved, desperately wanted him to be telling the truth. With a deep breath, she opened the binder. For the next hour she read. Sophia watched her silent and skeptical. Isabella's training in forensic accounting took over. She scanned the documents not with the eyes of a wounded wife, but with the dispassionate scrutiny of an auditor. And to her growing surprise, it all seemed to be there. The company was real. The technology, from what she could understand of it, seemed genuinely innovative. The funding agreement with Sterling March was legitimate and substantial. The email chains documented a grueling, high-stakes negotiation. His story, as outlandish as it seemed, was starting to hold water. The post was still unforgivable, a moment of supreme narcissistic folly, but perhaps it wasn't born of infidelity. Perhaps it was born of a different kind of obsession. It actually looks legitimate," Isabella murmured, a wave of confusion washing over her. She felt the hard certainty of her anger beginning to soften at the edges. "Don't let a pile of paper fool you," Sophia warned. "Con men are always good with paperwork." Isabella continued to flip through the pages, her eyes scanning lines of legal and financial jargon. She reached a section detailing the bridge financing Marcus had needed to secure the VC deal. It outlined the short-term loan required to prove liquidity to the investors. She read the paragraph, then read it again. And then she saw it. A single line item under the heading Collateral. It wasn't their investment portfolio. It wasn't stock options. It was a property address. The address of the beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in the suburbs that they were set to close on in 2 weeks. The house that was supposed to be Leo's home. The house whose down payment had been paid for entirely by a gift from her father, a gift given to her with the deed to be in both their names, only after the marriage was on solid footing. She felt the air leave her lungs. The document was a loan agreement, not with a bank, but with a private lender signed 2 weeks ago. Marcus had forged her signature on the preliminary documents and used the equity from her father's gift, their future home, as collateral to secure a high-interest, short-term loan for his business, without telling her. This was the true betrayal. The social media post was a matchstick. This was a forest fire. The post was a public humiliation, a thoughtless, cruel act. This was a calculated deception that put the roof over their child's head at risk. He hadn't just gambled with his own future. He had gambled with hers and with Leo's. He had taken the one thing that represented stability and safety and secretly pushed it onto the poker table. The binder slipped from her trembling hands and fell to the floor with a heavy thud. The sound startled Leo, who began to cry. Sophia rushed to her side. "Izzy, what is it? What did you find?" Isabella couldn't speak. She could only point a shaking finger at the scattered pages on the floor. Her face was a mask of utter devastation. The cold, calculated anger from the night before was gone, replaced by the profound, soul-crushing agony of a trust so completely and fundamentally shattered that it could never be repaired. He hadn't just posted something stupid. He had lied. He had committed fraud. He had taken her faith in him and used it as leverage. The frozen accounts were no longer an overreaction. They were a chillingly prescient move. She had saved them from a ruin he had secretly orchestrated. The man she had married wasn't just an insensitive fool. He was a liar and a thief who had stolen from his own family, and she, Isabella Rossi, had just uncovered the real crime. The calm that had defined Isabella for the past day was gone, obliterated by the discovery of Marcus's ultimate deception. A storm of pure, unadulterated rage took its place. She was no longer just a hurt wife. She was a protector whose entire domain had been threatened from within. She picked up her phone, her hands steady now with furious purpose, and sent Marcus a single text message. "Get back here. Now." When Marcus arrived, breathless and hopeful, he found a scene from his worst nightmares. Isabella was standing in the middle of the room, her face white with fury. Sophia stood behind her like a royal guard, cradling a now calm Leo, her expression one of utter contempt. On the floor, spread out like the scene of a crime, were the pages from his binder with the collateral agreement sitting squarely in the middle. "You wanted me to understand, Marcus." Isabella began, her voice low and trembling with contained violence. "Oh, I understand now. I understand everything. The post, the secrecy, the desperation. It all makes sense." She kicked the offending page with her foot. "Explain this." Marcus looked down and saw the loan agreement. The color drained from his face. Of all the documents, that was the one he had prayed she would overlook, a detail buried in the fine print that he could deal with later, once the VC money came in, and he could pay it off quietly. "I can explain," he stammered. "Can you?" She shot back, her voice rising. "Can you explain forging my signature? Can you explain taking the gift from my father, the home we were supposed to bring our son to, and gambling it on your little project? You didn't just lie to me, Marcus. You committed a crime against me, against us. It was a bridge loan, a formality," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "The VC money was guaranteed. I was going to pay it back this week, and you would have never even known. It was the only way to get the deal done to secure our future." "Our future!" she shrieked, the sound raw and painful. "You think a future built on a foundation of lies and fraud is secure? You stood there day after day talking about nursery colors and picking out furniture with me, all while knowing you had put a lien on our child's home. You let me believe we were partners, but we weren't. I was just another asset for you to leverage." Sophia stepped forward. "I've already spoken to my legal team, Marcus. What you did constitutes financial fraud and forgery. Isabella has grounds not only for divorce but for criminal charges." Marcus felt the floor drop out from beneath him. "Criminal charges. Isabella, I did it for us. I swear. I was so afraid of failing, of not being able to provide for you and Leo. I saw this one chance, this one shot to make it all work, and I took it. It was wrong. It was arrogant. It was stupid. But my heart was in the right place. I swear it." "Your heart." Isabella laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "Your heart was in your wallet, Marcus. It was with your ambition. It was with Chloe Vance and Project Chimera. It was never ever with us." As if on cue, Marcus's phone began to ring. The caller ID read Sterling March Capital. He looked at the phone in horror. It was the lead investor, Jonathan Sterling. "Don't you dare answer that in here," Isabella hissed. But it was too late. His phone buzzed again, this time with a text. He glanced at it. Marcus' wire for initial capital injection was rejected. Funds frozen. You are in breach of Section 4B of the agreement. You have 24 hours to rectify, or we are pulling out, and our legal team will be in touch regarding damages. Fix this. The final domino had fallen. The entire deal, his 2 years of work, was about to implode because he couldn't access the money he had promised. The money Isabella controlled. He looked at her, his face a portrait of utter desperation. Please. Everything, my entire life's work will be gone. They'll sue me into oblivion. We'll lose the house anyway because of the penalties in the contract. Please, you have to unfreeze the accounts, just for this one transfer. I'm begging you." It was the ultimate bitter irony. The free man was now a prisoner, and his wife, the one he had so carelessly disregarded, was his only jailer and his only hope for a pardon. Before Isabella could answer, the door to the hospital room swung open with force. Lorenzo Rossi stood there flanked by two men in impeccably tailored suits who could only be lawyers. He was a man who commanded gravity, and his presence sucked all the air out of the room. His cold, dark eyes took in the scene. His weeping daughter, his furious older daughter, the pathetic sight of his son-in-law, and the scattered documents on the floor. He ignored Marcus completely as if he were a piece of furniture. He walked to Isabella and placed a gentle hand on her arm. "It's over, Mia Cara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We're done with this. My men have the jet waiting. You and Leo are coming home. We will handle the annulment." As for him, he finally flicked his gaze to Marcus, a look of pure disgust on his face. "My legal team will ensure he never recovers from this. He will learn the price of betraying a Rossi." This was it. The crossroads. Isabella looked at her father, the avatar of her old life, offering a clean, surgical, and vengeful exit. She looked at Marcus, the architect of her current misery, a broken man on the verge of total annihilation. Then her gaze fell on Leo, sleeping in Sophia's arms, his face a perfect picture of peace. What did Leo deserve? A father, even a flawed one, or a life defined by his father's spectacular family-ordained destruction? A decision crystallized in her mind, cold and clear as a diamond. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about love. It was about power and control. Her father wanted to destroy Marcus, but letting him be destroyed meant the fallout, the lawsuits, the loss of the house could still splash onto her and Leo. Saving him, however, meant she owned him. She turned to her father. "Thank you, Papa, but I'm not leaving." She then turned her steely gaze to Marcus. "You want the money to save your deal? You'll get it, but not as my husband." She walked over to one of her father's lawyers. "Draw it up," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised everyone, including herself. "A post-nuptial agreement. A new business contract. I will provide the capital to save Project Chimera. In return, I want a 60% controlling stake in Thorn Dynamics. A personal, legally binding guarantee for Marcus, collateralized against all his future earnings and veto power over all major company decisions. He will report to a board that I appoint. He will no longer be the CEO. He'll be the CTO. I will be the primary shareholder. He will work for me. His salary will be determined by me. And every cent he earns will first go to repay the loan he took out against our son's home." The room was silent. Lorenzo Rossi stared at his daughter, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. He had come to crush a boy, but his daughter had just shown him how to enslave a king. Isabella looked at Marcus, her eyes devoid of warmth or affection. "Those are my terms. You will save your company, but you will lose your freedom. For real this time. You will work to earn back the home you gambled away. You will work to earn the right to be this child's father. Take the deal or walk away and let my father's lawyers have what's left of you. You have 1 minute to decide." Marcus stood there trapped and utterly defeated. He looked at the ruins of his ambition, the fury of the family he had betrayed, and the cold, hard face of the woman who now held his entire future in her hands. He had posted, "free at last," as a joke. Now he was being offered the deal of a lifetime, a gilded cage. It was his only way out. "I accept," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. 6 months later, the world had been remade. The sterile, emotionally charged atmosphere of the hospital room had been replaced by the chic, minimalist aesthetic of the new Thorn Dynamics headquarters. The company, powered by Isabella's emergency capital injection and Lorenzo Rossi's formidable business network, had not just survived, it had flourished. Project Chimera was the talk of the logistics industry, a disruptive force poised for massive success. But the victory felt different to everyone involved. The power dynamic in Isabella and Marcus's relationship had been irrevocably altered. It was no longer a marriage of equals, it was a corporate hierarchy. Isabella, with her 60% stake, was the silent, powerful chairwoman of the board. She had installed her sister Sophia and one of her father's most ruthless financial advisors as board members. She rarely came to the office, but her presence was felt in every decision, every budget approval, every strategic pivot. Marcus was, as per their agreement, the chief technology officer. He was brilliant at his job, freed from the pressures of fundraising and management. He poured all his energy into the technology, refining the code, leading the development team, and pushing the boundaries of what the software could do. He was professionally successful, but personally, he was a man living in a state of perpetual penance. Their home life was a carefully choreographed dance of civility and distance. They had not bought the colonial house. Instead, they lived in a sleek modern apartment owned by the Rossi Family Trust. It was beautiful, sterile, and felt more like a corporate residence than a home. They were co-parents first and foremost. They were unfailingly polite to each other for Leo's sake. They discussed feeding schedules, nap times, and developmental milestones with the detached professionalism of two colleagues managing a joint project. The love, the laughter, the easy intimacy that had once defined them was gone, replaced by a fragile, unspoken truce. Marcus never made a purchase over $100 without texting her first. His salary, determined by the board she controlled, was automatically split, with the majority going into a trust for Leo and to repay the loan against their once future home. They were in therapy. Twice a week they sat in a plush office with a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, who specialized in high-conflict couples. The sessions were brutal. Marcus had confessed everything, not just his actions, but the deep-seated fear of inadequacy that had driven him. He spoke of growing up with little of his desperate need to prove himself worthy of Isabella and her powerful family, a need so profound it had blinded him to everything else. Isabella, for her part, spoke of the profound violation of trust. It wasn't the post, she explained in one session, her voice clear and steady. The post was just the tip of the iceberg. It was the realization that the man I was building a life with had a completely separate ledger. He saw our shared assets as his personal safety net for risks I never agreed to take. He saw me as a resource, not a partner. There were no miraculous breakthroughs. There was only slow, grueling work. Marcus was learning humility. He was learning to listen, to truly see the consequences of his actions beyond his own ambition. He was becoming an excellent father, present and engaged in a way he never had been before. His moments with Leo were the only times Isabella saw a flicker of the old Marcus, the joyful, loving man she had married. Isabella was learning to live with the scars. She was discovering a strength and business acumen she never knew she possessed. She was a mother, a formidable chairwoman, a woman in complete control of her own destiny. But a part of her was in mourning for the simpler, more naive love she had lost. She was safe, she was powerful, but she wasn't happy. Not yet. One evening, Marcus was putting Leo to bed, singing him a soft, off-key lullaby. Isabella stood in the doorway watching them. The scene was perfectly domestic, yet it felt like watching a movie of someone else's life. After he had tucked Leo into his crib, Marcus came out, closing the door softly behind him. He saw Isabella standing there and gave her a small, hesitant smile. "He went right down," he said quietly. "You're good with him," she admitted. It was the closest she had come to a compliment in months. He nodded, accepting the small offering. "Is the final installment to pay back the private loan on the house goes through tomorrow. It's done. The lien will be gone." "I know," she said. "I saw the payment schedule." He took a hesitant step closer. "I know it doesn't fix anything. Not really. But I needed you to know. I've done the work, and I'm going to keep doing it. Not just because of the contract, but because I have to." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sad, weary honesty. "I broke us, Isabella. I know that. I don't know if we can ever be fixed. But I hope that one day you won't look at me and see a liability." Isabella held his gaze. The anger had faded long ago, leaving behind a vast, empty space. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel something other than caution or control. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. It was a flicker of possibility, a recognition of the broken man in front of her who was trying day by day to piece himself back together. "One day at a time, Marcus," she said, her voice soft. "One day at a time." It wasn't a promise and it wasn't an absolution, but it was a beginning. Their old life was gone forever, destroyed by a single careless post and the deeper betrayals it revealed. This new life was a fragile, uncertain thing being built not on a foundation of passionate love, but on the hard-won bedrock of consequences, accountability, and the shared unconditional love for the son who bound them together. The balance of power had shifted, but in doing so it had created a new, more honest, and far more challenging path forward. And so the story of Isabella and Marcus isn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. It's a real-life lesson in consequences. A 3-word post born from arrogance and insecurity became the catalyst that unraveled a marriage and exposed a far deeper betrayal. But from that wreckage, something new and arguably stronger was forged. It's a story about trust, how easily it can be shattered, and the near-impossible price of rebuilding it. Isabella's actions might seem extreme to some, but what would you have done? When the person you trust most gambles with your shared future behind your back, is there any response that's truly off-limits? We all face moments where trust is tested. Marcus's mistake was monumental, but his journey toward accountability is just as important. Can a person truly change, and can a relationship survive such a fundamental breach? What do you think? Was Isabella justified in her hostile takeover of their life? Or was it a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one.